Hi guys, this is Quad, and today I'm happy to present you my ideas and thoughts on the balance patch 2.4 for the Diablo 2 Resurrected. This is the first patch that we see in a long year, so of course let's have our expectations, but not too high. And generally, before I proceed with my point of view, I wanted to actually explain where I'm coming from. I'm solely coming from the single player experience, so I played probably like 99% in a single player, solo self-found, without trade and without multiplayer groups. Although I do have a good understanding of the multiplayer dynamics. On the other point of view, I have zero understanding of the PvP, so I'm not the one to listen to about PvP balances. And also speedrunning, although I do really like to watch it sometimes and understand some strats and things, but I think we really need to see somebody like Indrik or Bender explain us how the speedrunning can be affected by this patch. Although I think actually looking a little bit forward, this will be the most interesting patch for speedrunners in my opinion, and single players as well. So, but yeah, let's, without any further introduction, let's go into it and look into things one by one. We'll have today a few points to discuss, of course. The first of all, class changes, Mercenaries, Runewords, Heraldric Cube recipes or their absence, the set item bonus changes, level area changes, and some gameplay and tooltip changes. So yeah, let's start with classes and go one by one. Alright, let's start with Amazon. In the Javelin and Spear skills changes, we've seen a lot of emphasis going on anything except Lightning Fury. So for example, the physical builds with Impale and Fend has been buffed. This is something that I would be really interested to see how it plays out. I'm surprised that Jab was not improved in any way, because I think it's also really underplaying skill for the Javazon. The change to the Impale skill that is uninterruptible attack and always hits but also slows down the monster or the target is actually really interesting. The first idea that came to my mind that it might actually improve Javazon as an Uber killer, although one problem I see that there is actually no Javelin that has crushing blow or really high hitting stats. So you will have to go back to some spears, and Javazon with two-handed spear that might not have really good ability to survive such an occasion as Uber Tristram. So although that would be interesting to see how this plays around, and maybe we see some cool builds in the end that can do solo Ubers with Impale only. The Fend improvement in speed, I have to admit, I never ever used this skill in my life. So, but what I know is that the animation really takes a lot of time to finish one attack, so, and you usually get killed before it's actually done. So this is something that again might improve the quality of life. Not sure about really usability, again because there are not so many good options, let's say like mid or early high level gear that can be used for the Javazons in this case. Of course, we're not talking about the E-Bot D or something like this. Now all the lightning skills, I understand the removal of our Lightning Fury synergy from them so that they can be a bit more standalone, and if somebody wants to play just those three without Lightning Fury, although I wouldn't really understand why, maybe just as a complementary damage type to the physical ones, but otherwise, yeah, well, it's okay. Let's see how it plays out. The Poison Javelin and Plague Javelin, the change is actually really interesting, so potentially there is a way to scale up the damage and deal something with this, because before it was really not possible on the higher level difficulties. The only challenge here is that there is actually zero Javelin that provides any like percentage damage to poison skills or minus poison skills damage. So again, probably your weapon of choice will be Titan's Revenge, which is a bit funny, and I would expect something like Gargoyle's Bite being with minus poison damage so that we can actually utilize that ability better. So really hard to see how poison javelin can actually in the future in the end game provide sufficient damage so that it's not just killing white mobs and that's it. I do see a potential with a Plague Runeword that we'll see later to cast lower resist and provide in this way minus 57, I think, poison resistances, so maybe this can help in the future with a barb mercenary, but we'll talk about this later when we see the Runewords. Otherwise, really, there is no possibility to reduce poison resistance from enemies unless you stack all your shield, like 4 shield slots, sockets, and 3 in headgear with poison facet. For the passive and magic skills, honestly, I think everything is basically just a quality of life that doesn't give anything, especially the inner sight and slow missiles. Those two considered to be maybe good in a group or something, but in reality wouldn't do anything. So in my opinion, it's really hard to justify casting those two instead of just making plain damage, even in a group or in a solo play. So I don't think this will really play in any build as a vital part of it. Valkyrie is interesting. I'm personally don't think that she can do anything except a really good tank, but I know that some members of community were concerned that this could be really easy carrying you through the game. Well, I'm not sure. Maybe for a playthrough, this is an issue, but for really endgame farming, she's rather only tanking and just being a mid shield rather than really decent damage. Finally, we have, in my opinion, if I understand correct, a fix to the dodge and avoid animations. So maybe now it will make sense to actually use those and have them instead of just skipping those two at all. I think bow and crossbow skills, these are the most interesting from the Amazon, because yeah, you see the cost reduction of mana, which was the main pain point in majority of the skills. The elemental skills, they were just too hungry for mana that you could sustain it normally, and also damage scale for almost all the abilities, for the magic arrow, guided arrow, strafe, and so on. Exploding arrow and immolation arrow with fire arrow seems like now we will be able to actually do something decent with a fire boazon, although I still think this will require really high level rune words like Phoenix in a bow, and again the flickering flames, the new rune word in a headgear, to actually have decent damage and a way to deal with the immunities. Of course, you will need infinity as well on your mercenary. So this could be potentially good endgame build as well, because there is a decent AoE, there is decent damage, and ability to actually sustain it now without chugging potions every second. Overall, I would say the Amazon changes are fine. They are not really crazy, so only the fire skills and impale seem to be a little bit interesting to exploring and see what actually you can push out of the new setup of the Amazon. All right, let's move on to the Assassin. One of my main dreams were to actually play martial arts Assassin and feel good about playing it. And to be honest, I think this is something that might happen, but with a little note. I do believe that martial arts assassin can be played now, but only the elemental damage one, so namely the Phoenix Strike or one of the Blades of Ice, Claws of Thunder, or Feast of Fire. The reason is that now all the finishers will only consume one charge instead of all three. So this makes it really easy to hit and cast, hit and cast. So the reason why I think that any other like Cobra Strike or Tiger Strike won't really play out as a melee assassin is simply because the claws, the assassin claws, their average damage is too low. There is no way to scale up the damage to have at least like in 5 or 600 max damage. Without that, I think there will be never really good damage coming out of the assassin. Although, as said again, Phoenix Strike Assassin might be really cool now because you are able to really hit fast and proc those elemental attacks quick enough to actually deal decent damage. Plus, you have the ability to deal with any immunities and, of course, with Infinity, or maybe again with lower resist Plague Act 5 Mercenary, you could do even more damage to those. So this will be really exciting, and I think this is something that I would be really interested to play and see how it works out. Shadow Disciplines, no changes. Let's go. Traps. This is something that is probably the most interesting. Again, we see the removal of a Death Sentry synergy skills, so that again you have more variability on building the lightning, purely lightning traps. And the same happens with Fire Blast and Fire traps. So again, they have increased synergy from each other, which in my opinion is actually really great, because maybe in the end you will be able to make really interesting fire traps assassin. Now, with increased damage across the board for all the fire skills, plus additional rune words like Flicker and Flames that will allow all fire builds to have minus fire resistances on enemies, will actually really help for those builds to play out. And lastly, we see a really good change in the blade skills, so the Blade Sentinel, Blade Fury, and Blade Shield. Just not to read it all out loud. All of these things adding a lot of weapon damage to every skill. The synergies are added finally, so that they really make sense to put points into all three of them and maximize the damage output. This all seems really interesting, so potentially this could be a really endgame build, especially with a Blade Fury and maybe trying the Ubers as well. So yeah, we will need to see how this plays out. This could also be an addition in some sort to the martial arts, like Blade Shield, for example. Overall, assassin changes look promising, so I like the change in the martial arts. I think it's one of the good ways to sustain the charges and make sure that the gameplay is easier and smoother. With the Shadow Discipline skills, I think without a further balancing of a class, I think it's really hard to change anything there to make them a bit more meaningful. Barbarian, all the disappointment. I think this, personally, for me, the changes here are the most disappointing. Again, we get some tooltips on the war cries, which is, well, fine. The war cry that deals 30% more damage now, and secretly I have to tell you that the war cry barb does not deal any damage. It's a mercenary that kills everybody when you fly around in pits. So I don't think this will do any changes. So to me, this is absolutely no change. The only interesting part here is a green word, so I believe this could be something interesting for maybe a throw barb, or again, I wouldn't say frenzy, because frenzy just runs too fast around, and for leap attack as well, you will be relocating too much to keep casting those green words. So honestly, I think for everything else, except maybe throw barb, this is not really useful. But the change is interesting. I always like the idea of green word being kind of a aura that provides minus damage for every enemy nearby. So this is interesting. Combat Mastery, the easiest one of all. Throwing Mastery has a pierce chance. This one is, again, I think it's really short-sighted. I like way more the way it was changed in the Project Diablo 2, where the missiles ricochet and bounce from one enemy to another, because this provides true AoE, and the chance to pierce only provides this really narrow AoE from one line. In reality, you will not have monsters in one line unless you farm Maggot Lair or Arcane Sanctuary. So everywhere else, you will have monsters around in a small ball. And I really see this as an issue, because you will not be able again to provide decent AoE. In a close combat, you will still not use Throwing Mastery. You would rather go with a Frenzy or Concentration or Berserker, or again, maybe a Whirlwind. So I think the chance to pierce here is a nice addition, but this is kind of a half measure in my opinion. Alright, combat skills. Leap and leap attack. This is something that a lot of people are actually waiting for, and they were really curious to see how it will be improved. The reality, I never honestly played the leap attack because it was so clunky after I tried it once, so that I really don't want to do it anymore. And in reality, it will really stay clunky still, because you will just hit at some point some random monster that will stay there still and just probably not deal enough damage. And it will be again a single target. The speed of leap motion is making it even more OP on the multiplayer, because then you keep all the monsters in stun all the time completely, so there is no way they can move at all. And that's pretty much it about leaping. Berserk, changing the shout synergy with battle orders. Well, I understand the idea behind it. Of course, there is no defense when you are berserking, but now all the pit zerkers and pindle zerkers will even have more life, because battle orders is just OP for this. They are making already good build even easier, so I don't understand why. Double throw damage, again, as I said, let's see how it works out. The problem with double throw that there are literally only two weapons that are meaningful for the throw barb, something like F Lacerator and maybe F Warstrike, and that's it, because everything else you will just run out of quantity in like 1 minute, so those two can be used with pierce and more damage. Maybe yes, you will be able to farm something and do some decent damage. Frenzy, they added a synergy of increased stamina with 4 seconds per level. In my opinion, it's just stupid, because really what you don't care about when you run Frenzy is the duration. Because with a level 20 you already have enough duration to basically do whatever you want and hit the next monster. So for me, this is not going to do anything, and it's going to be not used as a synergy at all. So as I said already, Barbarian, in my opinion, is kind of the lowest point from all the classes. Not really inspiring, not really interesting. So let's move on to the Druid. Druid, on the other side, is actually, in my opinion, the best class that they changed. I even feel like Dibransky was whispering in their ears. Let's go one by one. Elemental skills. So they buffed all the fire skills and also added a physical part to, for example, Armageddon. They removed the cast delays for Fissure, which is amazing. This was generally one of the main problems with fire skills, that you had the cooldown, or basically the cast delay, that you cannot use them in a rapid sequence, or let's say drop a Fissure and then start spamming Firestorm or Molten Boulders. So this is something that will be way more possible now, and this means that damage output per second will be way higher. So this is very interesting. Also, with generally good fire skills like Phoenix and the Flickering Flame or Raven Lore, I think this will be really, really great to play the Fire Druid. And don't get me wrong, it was already good. With a top tier gear, it was already good in many locations. It could farm easily things like Chaos Sanctuary, the Ancient Danos, Pindle, and so on. So you will now have even more possibilities to do so, and it will be way more pleasant. So this is really well done, good change. The Wind Druid, well, they did as they promised. They didn't touch the meta at all, so basically it stays as it is. Arctic Blast changes, again, I think to me it's a joke. Maybe now you could play through as a Wind Druid from the start, but why would you do so unless you want to roleplay or do something like that? So whatever. Casting Cyclone Armor and Hurricane, Werebear, Werewolf form. Yeah, thank you. Quality of life, really nice. Twister, I again don't believe this will do anything. The only potential here I see is in a group play, that maybe instead of the shockwaves, you can now use Twister to stun enemies and do basically the same role as Werebear with a shockwave was doing already before in the multiplayer. Shapeshifting skills. So again, I have to admit that I didn't play the Werewolf or Werbear Druid almost at all. So for me, really hard to say anything. The only thing I know is that Fury used to be bugged, and there were issues that if you get hit or something like that, that all the attacks will miss after that. So I'm not sure if this is something that will be fixed, and I will talk about the bugs in general in the end as well. And again, probably one of the most exciting changes for me, because I like to play summons. I don't know, maybe it has to do with my first character in Diablo 2 was the Summon Necro, so I kind of like this playstyle and just the idea of controlling the army. So yeah, they changed all the summoning skills, and this is really awesome. So the Sages, the Heart of Wolverine, and the Spirit of Barbs, they got some changes to their life that is not randomized anymore, and they have consistent physical damage resistance, which is alright, so but nothing else changed. Again, they didn't want to ruin the balance, I guess. But what is great is that now we have the baseline improvement in all the summons. So Ravens will be again now more like a casting spell that they will deal damage, and seems like they will be dealing a decent amount of damage. So we will see the rise of Grachevod, as we say in Russia, and then Spirit, Wolf, and Dire Wolf and Grizzly will be around there to either tank or deal more damage. So this is really interesting. I would really love to play through as this character. It was always my dream to play as a Summon Druid, and this will probably happen when the PTR comes live. The changes to the vines or creepers, it seems alright to me. Like, there is nothing groundbreaking here. Again, the last two, the mana and life ones, were never used. The poison creeper, what was funny to me is that they added a synergy from rabies for poison damage, but at the same time they removed the poison creeper synergy to rabies. So I'm not sure if it's a mistake or what's the plan behind it. Let's see. Would be interesting to see fully poison build as a kind of werewolf, rabies plus poison creeper as a druid. Maybe this is something possible, but we will need to see when the PTR comes live. Just to sum it up, I think Druid is probably the best uplift in all the classes, and probably that's why he's in the middle, because yeah, having really decent fire build alternative now, even without high-end Runewords, but with those you will really have amazing build. Then also having the ability to spend more points into Werewolf and Werbear skills to have some distinctive builds, and finally what seems like a really great summoner build. Alright, let's move on to the Necromancer. Necromancer is probably, yeah, the least expected to change because it is already pretty OP and one of the best characters in the game with a variety of builds that are pretty good. So they changed from the summoning skills, the Raise of Skeletal Mage. I think this is good because finally, with increased life, they will live a little bit longer than 1 minute, and also increasing the damage would finally make it meaningful to actually put points into it. Now there is a potential put more points into Skeletal Mage, and with Infinity or with a lower res in the beginning, you will really do enough damage with like 30 skeletons. This seems to be really good now. Changes to the golems, in my opinion, don't really do anything. Again, I don't see the point why you would not use Iron Golem for the Insight Meditation aura. It's just too good to dismiss. Poison and Bone skills. So finally Bone Armor has 15 scaling, so no more pumping points into Bone Wall or Bone Prison. Then the Bone Spear changes. Interesting, because I always thought that it's just a little bit too little damage to be a good farmer in different locations, especially in a multiplayer game. I think it was lacking some damage. The only problem I see that this could be really an issue for PvP. Curses. So they went and they informed us before that they were kind of experimenting with curses, and the first one is with Weaken to provide scaling of damage reduction per level. In my opinion, this is again kind of a miss, because in the single player game, you will not use Weaken at all. You will always use curses that provide extra damage, whether amplify damage or lower resist. In some cases, you will use Decrepify on bosses or Ubers. That said, in a group play, you would do the same. There is no reason in any LOD location to minimize the damage from monsters. You would rather try to kill them, providing this extra damage from amp or lower resist. So the idea is interesting, but having only one active curse at a time just doesn't make it work out. So Necromancer, to sum it up, again, I think as expected, not so many changes. I'm happy that mages can now be played, and maybe could be really interesting build with just skeletons and mages. Paladin, defensive auras, no changes, only tooltip changes, thank you. Offensive auras. Here is something interesting happening about Holy Fire and overall for the Holy Freeze, Holy Shock, and Holy Fire auras. So first of all, they have this overarching effect of being closer or further away from enemies and dealing more damage. So this is also an interesting concept, of course. And then the second is that Holy Fire gets a massive addition of synergy damage and also damage level scaling. So now perhaps with some interesting weapons, like I think it's Hand of Fire or something like this, with Flickering Flame and Phoenix in a shield, you could probably now deal really good damage with fire. So again, seems like fire will play out in the first season in general. All the other changes are not so interesting. Sanctuary Aura, again, there was also some kind of a bug that prevented really dealing any damage or something like that. In the combat skills, I think it's not a surprise that the only interesting change is Feast of Heavens, because all the other things really don't do anything. Sacrifice, I once tried to build a sacrifice pit runner, and I was dead in the middle of the run. Conversion, converted monsters don't deal any damage, and there is no point in it. Smite, thank you for the tooltip. Holy Bolt, again, really no need to use this skill basically at all. And Feast of Heavens is the only interesting part that was already possible to play in the Ancient Thanos, I believe, but it was a little bit difficult to aim to deal damage, and because of a cooldown, it was kind of always not really nice to play. So only for those who were really eager to try it out and maybe maximize the build and optimize it as much as possible were using it, but otherwise I think it was just not working. Now with a lower casting delay, that the piercing of the targets with improved targeting functionality, so this could be really cool. So I think that this build could really play. Overall, Paladin, again, as expected, is in really good condition and not so many changes. So Holy Fire might be interesting in an endgame setup just to tinker with it. And also I think Feast of Heavens will be really interesting to play in the end as well. Sorceress. I see mainly three interesting changes to the Sorceress that will play out with her. First of all is the absence of a casting delay or not sharing the casting delay between different skills. This means that such stuff like throwing Blizzard and then right there throwing Meteor is actually going to work now and will deal enough damage per second, let's call it this way. And the same with Frozen Orb and so on. So I think this is something that will be really interesting to see how it affects overall Sorceress and different builds that combine casting delay skill without casting delay skill. The armors changes. I am not sure if chilling armor really will somehow make sense. And again, pumping 60 points into fully synergized chilling armor, the damage that should come out of it has to be really huge in order to make any sense out of it. In my opinion, it won't, and really even looking at the numbers will be kind of boring for me. The second interesting change out of the three that I mentioned is the synergy for the Nova. So the static field synergy is really great. Again, it will probably feel really nice to play the Nova, Thunderstorm, static field, and Fireball. So I know that Nova Fireball is kind of cool build that people play, but it's usually a little bit hard to play and gear up. So, but with additional damage to Nova from static field, with improved Thunderstorm again for the synergy from static field, this might be really interesting to play now, and hopefully more people will enjoy this build in the future. And lastly, the fire skills. Of course, the most interesting part here is Inferno. Nah, I'm kidding. Of course it's Blaze. No. Sorry guys, I'm trying to be funny. Of course it's Hydra. So again, removing casting delay will now allow to cast those much faster and have decent damage output. But one of the main problems in my opinion was that Hydra was completely missing any AoE. So those fireballs are working maybe fine for a single target, but they don't do any AoE. So you will need them to use the fireball to compensate for this somehow. So hopefully the damage output will be decent enough to farm anything with this. One actually interesting thing that I see, not jokingly, is Blaze, the change of the run speed. So I'm thinking if this could work out anyhow in a speedrunning community. So maybe because it's I think level 6 skill, so before getting to the teleport, maybe you are able to do it. Although with jail strats where you actually just try to get level 18 as fast as possible, maybe that won't make any difference at all. All right, these are all the class changes. Again, I think the number one is Druid for me. Definitely really interesting, lots of build potentials, really interesting changes and lots of options over there. Maybe Assassin is the next one because of the blade skills and improving the fire traps and martial arts. So again, I always wanted to play martial arts. This could be really cool. Amazon is probably the third to see how the bow skills will play out, and especially Fireball, and potentially the very niche Impale kind of Amazon. All the rest I think is alright. Sorceress, interesting. Paladin, nothing really new for me, or I wouldn't see how other builds will be outperformed by anything new. Barbarian is the most disappointing. I think a lot of those abilities are kind of miss, and it needs a bit more tinkering and balancing and changes to be interesting. Necromancer, well, anyways, Necromancer is good, with mages even better, so I'm fine with it. Alright, let's go through the Mercenaries really quick. I think overall changes are interesting, of course. Act 1 Rogue now has the cold freezing arrow, so a bit more crowd control. Imagine also with 100% pierce with a mist rune word, this could be really interesting, so a lot of crowd control. But I hardly see how any of the mercenaries can outperform the Act 2 mercenary auras. So, and also the auras that you can make in polearms. So maybe for the early game, having something rogue archer with insight and a bow is interesting, but end game I think will be still desert mercenary from Act 2 in most of the cases, except maybe some niche variants again. The Desert Mercenary Act 2 didn't have any changes except the thorns, but again, we need to see the numbers, and it's a kind of very experimental change, so let's see what will be there. Improving Act 3 Mercenary with all the life changes, defense, and so on is kind of cool. From the all three Iron Wolves, I personally looked more closely at the fire, because adding enchant is actually really interesting change. This could be a potential buff for any like precasting situations where you, for example, speedrunners need to kill the boss, so they would really appreciate extra attack rating. Or maybe for Ubers, you can also get this one if you don't have a demon limb or something like this. Although I think still the king will be the lightning because of a static field. I mean, come on, Blizzard. Static field is OP and you give it to the one mercenary while not buffing any other else. So what does it actually mean for speedrunners? It means that on every difficulty for every boss, this mercenary will be taken to reduce the HP to 1%, 25%, and 50% respectively on normal, nightmare, and hell. So this is really funny to see how this will play out in speedrunning. Would I use it anyhow on my regular game? I would say no, unless I really want to roleplay or do some theme playthrough of some of the character. I don't see again how even static field can compete with constant conviction or lower res from other Act 5 or maybe faith from Act 1. Alright, and finally Act 5 Barbarian Warrior. Again, it's quite interesting to make them super tanks and really beefy with some damage, and adding the battle cry is really interesting. What I see this mercenary can be used is for the builds that don't have any elemental damage, because otherwise you want infinity on the Act 2, and for the builds that don't deal physical damage, because otherwise you want Act 2 mercenary with a might aura. So what I thought really niche usage is Plague Runeword with this Barbarian and the Plague Javelin, because he with the proc of the lower resist and battle cry will survive a lot, and everybody around will have the lower res, while Javazon with Plague Javelin will just throw those poison darts. So this is something that I see. Otherwise, again, it is really impossible to beat the auras that you get from Act 2 Mercenaries and the auras that you can make in the pole arms. So the Infinity, the Doom, the Pride Runewords. Interesting, of course, cool changes for just the flavor of it, but usability, optimizing gameplay, I don't see how it will work out. Alright, let's go really quick about Runewords as well. Insight in the bows and crossbows. This is probably the most cool change for playthrough as a Boazon, because they really lack mana in the beginning, and also really lack a decent source of damage. And Insight has critical strike, has decent enhanced damage, and is super cheap. So making this rune word in any exceptional bow will already improve the feeling and just quality of playing as a Boazon tremendously. Maybe you can also use it on the Act 1 Mercenary, but again, I would rather use it on Act 2 Mercenary in a polearm. All the introduced new rune words, the Plague, I think one of the most interesting ones, except the Flickering Flame. So this one has a chance to get lower res on prog, decent chance, and if you put it on a barb mercenary who will be always in the fight, so I think this will be probably the best usage of it. Not sure if any class would actually use it on themselves, but again, for the low res proc or cleansing aura, it's quite nice. Also decent damage. Pattern, just a nice option for really like early game rune word for martial arts assassins, because otherwise they really don't have anything to use. Maybe like strength, but that will not deal damage at all. So unbending will, this is something that I was debating quite a bit, because again, it's quite interesting, of course, on the Act 5 Barbarian with a taunt procs and the battle cry combo, that he basically taunts a lot of enemies towards him, then casts the battle cry, and then they all do a lot of damage. So it really helps to crowd control, and again, it's super cheap. Somebody said it's probably harder to find 6-socket base, but in reality it's basically like obedience, and you get decent damage. The only problem that you don't get any crushing blow on this one. So doing Ubers, like, or considering this as an early Ubers weapon on a Barbarian or Paladin, probably not possible. So without Crushing Blow will be really hard, I think. Wisdom. This is really a strange rune word. It doesn't give anything except of cannot be frozen for just a pull rune, which is nice though. And otherwise it only provides the piercing attack and attack bonus rating. Not much. Maybe again useful as a really early on rogue, mercenary, and maybe on the barbarian throw bar, but I still don't see the point of using it, to be honest. Obsession. This one that I was debating quite a lot as well, because honestly getting the set of stats for Zod and Eastrun that you can get from having two spirits in your hands is very strange in my opinion. So yeah, I understand that you can find really good stuff with like +3 to Hydra, +3 to Fireball, and +3 to Fire Mastery, which you will probably never find in your life, but possibility of having this, and probably of course in the online play you will find something like this, or like those 500,000 people will find eventually one of those stuffs. Yeah, then having +7 to those skills with decent FCR, with decent FHR, increasing life, regenerating mana, and having huge all res is really interesting. I would say that this is probably not usable for energy shield or like lightning sorceress, because you don't really benefit so much from increased maximum life, as usually you would pump almost everything into energy. So yeah, maybe in some fire or cold build you can use it. On the other classes, I'm not sure. I don't think Druid can benefit, and as I said, all the other stats, if you don't get plus like native plus skills that you get from the staff, it's just two spirits. So I don't think it's so useful on any other class except Sorceress. Flickering Flame, the best rune word that was introduced. Honestly, having +3 to fire skills and easy access to -15 to enemy fire resistances, because Vex and Pool, let's be fair, it's really easy to find, doesn't take so long, so it's really cheap. Plus resist fire aura is also very nice. So before there was no possibility to reduce enemy fire res on the headgear for anybody except Druid with a Raven lore, or having, let's say, like 3-faceted tiara, which is probably not as good as anything else you could do with it. But again, making this one in a Druid belt, amazing. Making this for the Sorceress, amazing. Making this one for the Fire Paladin, amazing. So really lots of applications. Even probably for the Fire Assassin, Fire Traps Assassin will be really cool. Of course, if the minus enemy fire res will work with traps. So yeah, this is in my opinion one of the best rune words that was introduced. Mist, the rune word with a Cham and Ghoul in it. Ghoul is cheap, Cham is also rather cheap, like on the same level as Vex. So I would consider this rune word rather cheap. Maybe the price will go up because of it a little bit, but I don't think so. So this is a main contender of the Faith rune word on Rogue, of course. I don't think it makes sense to wield it yourself as a Boazon, because yeah, still wouldn't probably give enough damage and attack speed. The only difference with Faith is that it also provides attack speed, not only damage. And this is usually what people are looking for when building it. Will really require a lot of testing, this one, to see if it actually makes sense to use on any build. New Haradri Cube recipes that we didn't get. This is a new title of this section. This is great that we got a possibility to up our set items, but honestly, that's not so important. I mean, it's cool, of course, but then why to stop here? Why didn't we get the possibility to up the crafted items? I will just give you a little brief example. So in order to craft something cool, you need about 500 attempts. Then you will probably land on something really good. Not to say that mostly crafting now resides with jewelry, with rings and caster amulets, and sometimes also people craft the heat power or blood gloves, and sometimes as well blood belts and caster belts, maybe blood helms sometimes. But really, the problem is that finding those exceptional or allied bases for those items, especially for belts, it takes a lot. In 2 years of playing Plagi, I found maybe like 200 exceptional and allied belts that are fitting for caster and blood recipe. Really, buying those magic items from the vendor, crafting something with them, and then if they are good, upgrading them to the exceptional and allied version is what we need. So I hope they really introduce those recipes in order to revive a little bit crafting. Otherwise, really, crafting will be still super bad. Set item bonus changes. This is something, again, I am not really looking positively so much because, again, my perspective on it, when you play through the game, you rarely find two pieces of the same set. Sometimes you find really low tier sets that are not introduced here, like Sarus, but mostly you don't. Then again, all these changes will be kind of meant to be beneficial for any of the second or third characters that you try to build. But in this case, you would probably just go ahead with somebody rushing you or using the Runewords. So you will have already enough items to carry you through normal and nightmare, and in hell all these sets already diminish their usability. Again, I still don't see the point in these changes. I don't understand how it is meant to play out in the future, so I'm not convinced. Level area changes. This is again something that was a bit disappointing for me, to be honest, because I don't see the point or like the direction where it goes. Let's just go one by one. Underground passage level 2, now hell level 85. Wow, this is great, considering that underground passage level 1 is like area level 65 or 71 or something like this. Really useless. Then follows the 5 interesting changes. The stony tombs are really cool to farm from Project Diablo 2. We know it. It's really nice area, very compact with enough unique packs and good poppables. So this is really cool. Even on the random maps, so like Battle.net, this is really nice area to farm for all the fire builds. Easy to do, easy to farm, easy to find, really cool. Arachnid layer. So once I actually farmed Spider Cavern, and I did it with a Berserker bar because there are quite a bunch of different immunities. The area is pretty dangerous. The spiders have a lot of HP and they hit pretty hard. But again, I think this is a introduced area to farm. Could be interesting to try it out. Swampy Pit level 1 and 2. Again, this is something that I farmed quite a bit in Project Diablo 2. This is an interesting area, although it's super dangerous, but the fact that you have waypoints right next to it, so you don't need to find it in the random maps, and it is also easy to run in terms of navigating area, so you always go to the right from the entrance, and then you will basically cover the entire map before entering the next level. So this is really interesting area. Of course, it's very difficult because of souls and dolls, so you really need to be bulletproof and basically unbeatable in order to run it. And by the way, the Swampy Pit level 3 doesn't have any unique pack, so it's complete waste to go there. After that, we have more Act 3, the temples. To be honest, I don't see the point of raising the area level 84 to area level 85. To me, it's just doesn't make any sense. It's already good. Sewers, doesn't matter what level it is, it's a garbage area to farm. It's really hard. It's hard to aim anything there, hard to spot anything there. It's gigantic, so never go there. The Abaddon, Pit of Acheron, Infernal Pit, these three, again, it's an interesting choice, of course, because nobody goes there. The only problem with them that the monsters there are pretty hard and usually they lack density. So maybe you can hit them if you just farm every area in the game, like you enter the game and then you go from Act 1 until Act 5 with all those high level areas. Otherwise, I don't really see the point in going there. But again, for the change, this could be really interesting. Drifting Cavern and Icy Cellar. Well, from one point, Drifting Cavern was already farmed quite a bit. I think the fire builds are good there, so like Fire Assassin or Fire Sword, or like a Summoner Necro or something like this that are good everywhere. So those were already interesting areas to farm kind of off the beaten path. Icy Cellar was basically the same. So overall on the area changes, I think it's a good first step. I would be really interested to see maybe some others in the future, or I would also suggest developers not to go with always level 85, although it's kind of a no-brainer. But I believe if we push more areas to level 83, 84, so that they are already interested to run, this will be great, like tombs, for example, in Act 2 in the Canyon of the Magi. So those will be really great to pump to the level 83 or 84. But doesn't necessarily have to be 85 because that could be maybe then too much. And last two things about general gameplay changes. So here I don't really understand a lot of things except number 2. So the hit block will not apply while your character is skill casting anything. I guess this is something that is together with point number 3 is more used for PvP or makes more sense for PvP. And number 2 will be basically, as I understand, removing this trick of having really slow and really fast weapon when dual wielding and achieving really high attack speed. Item tooltip changes, thank you for adding classes, that's alright. And lastly, I wanted to say something that I really miss from these balance changes is the list of bug fixes. There is literally a list of 200 bugs that migrated from LOD to Z2R, and I think this is one of the things that needs to be fixed. And also small quality of life things that were already so annoying, like the flickering loot when you run and basically loot just moves around and shift, you cannot see anything, or Kain not IDing anything in the cube. I really want to see those things fixed. Let's just make the basic things right. Okay, just to have couple of last words. So I think this is really great to see this patch. It is really interesting, as I already said in the beginning. In my opinion, this will be the most interesting for like solo players and speedrunners. I don't know if speedrunners really appreciate the changes to the game, but just from the point of view of having some novelty and really finding new strats, new builds to beat different categories, I think it will be really interesting. For single player, it could be really cool because you have more potential to do kind of a role play, to choose some class, some build, and play through untwinged solo self-found. This is something that's really interesting. For multiplayer and group play, it's really hard to say how these changes will really affect anything because, again, they will not shift the meta. So again, it will be the same Sorceress running to Mephisto. If not with Blizzard, then with Hydra. Will be the same Heimerdians and the same Baal running groups that just, yeah, have a bunch of everything and it doesn't matter what you run actually. I think, again, this patch is probably the most interesting for single player. For PvP, I'm not sure. I literally have no idea about PvP in Diablo 2. And for speedrunners, again, as I said, I think it would be really interesting if they accept these changes with an open mind. So yeah, this is my view on it. I'm looking forward to hopefully trying to test it. We'll try to produce more content then. Thank you so much for watching. If you watched until now, you're a crazy person. And yeah, see you next time. Bye.